All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, now I'm going to be honest with everyone watching. This is, I think, the third iteration of this one. And if you were present for any or part of the first two, well, we got bounced by Vimeo. Uh, Unfortunately for you all, we're literally taking this one from the top, straight up, no chaser, starting from the beginning. And and it's just going to be that way. I mentioned at the beginning, last time we dedicated this show to Bill O'Reilly because of the famous Bill O'Reilly "We're Doing It Live" explosion that he had on TV, which is captured. That was us earlier.
Yeah.
Now we're dedicating the rest of the show to Bill Murray for Groundhog Day. So
It's Groundhog's Day again.
get ready because we're coming at you straight up live or in Memorex, depending on which one of us you caught beforehand. I'm Ryan English. We have Matt Mullins with us. He, otherwise affectionately known as the Chief Thief. And we're going to be talking to you guys again about some of the stuff that went on during Patch Tuesday, which was 2 weeks prior. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we learned at Cyber WarCon, which was up in DC, which was last week, which was also why we didn't do this last week, because we were getting our knowledge on. And then, of course, we'll also be covering some stuff that was discussed yesterday during the Aspen Cyber Summit, which was probably held in Aspen. I wouldn't know because I wasn't allowed to go. And, my schedule's just too tight for that sort of stuff. Right, Matt? We have too many other things to do.
We're busy. We're busy dudes.
Yeah. I wanted to go and be at the Aspen Cyber Summit, but they didn't need me. They had a broadcast. So, but here we are. And we're glad that you guys are with us. And we hope that you can stay with us due to all the little technical things that we went through. Earlier, we found out the hard way that since David Maynard was using a Linux box at home, guess what doesn't go well with Vimeo? Am I even saying Vimeo right, or is it Vimeo? Doesn't matter, because Linux doesn't care.
Linux doesn't care.
Linux doesn't care.
Honey Badger meme.
And if somebody out there has a workaround so that you could stream out on Vimeo with a Linux machine, please drop that knowledge to us. Then you're the smartest person in the room today. But despite Dave's best efforts in pulling out what remained of his hair, we're not going to be able to show you a video of this really cool Mark of the Web workaround, which was being exploited on us all without our knowledge. So let's set the stage for that just a minute. If you guys remember, at the beginning of the summer, or somewhere in the middle, Matt and I were talking to you all about Falina. The Falina exploit was especially, it was bad news. Microsoft released a patch for that. Was it in July, Matt?
Yeah, I want to say it was in July. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things, I believe it was July. One of the things that Microsoft said was they were hedging a little bit, maybe, because in their thinking, Falina wasn't that bad because Mark of the Web protection had been extended. And so if you're thinking, well, what's Mark of the Web? Is it, it's today's case, it would, be 666 based on this afternoon's work. But Mark of the Web is the last thing you see. It's like your last safety measure before triggering whatever the exploit is that was sent to you. There'll usually be something that you see at the top of your screen that says, are you sure you want to open this? Do you trust this? It's from the internet. And the analogy that Matt and I were using last time is, it's like kind of like when Count Dracula appears at your door. You were like, oh, I was having a dinner party. I didn't expect Count Dracula to show up. What's up, Count? And he's like, yes, it's been a long day. I hear you're cooking. And you're like, yeah, I'm cooking. I'm kind of busy. What can I do for you? He's like, I'd like to come in and talk to you. And you're like, but wait. And then boop, a little pop-up above your door says, Count Dracula's from the internet. Do you trust this? And you're like, oh, well, yeah, my AV didn't go off. you know, my garlic is working. I should be fine. Boop. And next thing you know, you're
GG
bloodless.
life.
Yeah, you're laying there and you've been drained. And that's kind of what Faulina was doing. Mark of the Web was like your last chance. It's like beyond here lay monsters. So they said, well, okay, you can patch for Faulina. Here's your patch. And you don't really have to worry too much because Mark of the Web is like your last bit of protection. And so the patch came out for Faulina. Everything was cool until someone, probably sitting around, some red teamer running out of ideas, Matt, at the end of a long day, right? Sitting there saying, well, I'll just throw some spaghetti up against the wall, see what sticks.
Yeah.
And if you've ever worked on the electrical at your home with, let's say, in this case, my dad, who always expects me to hold the flashlight, even though I'm a grown up now, I have to keep holding the flashlight. So, you're sitting there under the house and he's going through the lights, he's going through the switches at the breaker, and he's yelling at you, is that the one? No. Is that the one? No. Finally, he gets the right one, and that's the breaker. Mark of the Web was somebody simply doing a last-ditch Hail Mary to work around the only bit of protection that there was for this exploit, and it was apparently pretty easy. It was one of those things that didn't take a lot of technical know-how.
Yeah.
It was just somebody saying, well, what happens if I disable that pop-up from going up? What? I mean, can I do that? If yes, then let's try that. And like all great red teamers, it really just comes down to somebody fiddling around with one of the knobs and switches that shut off the lights down there.
Yeah.
So Matt was talking earlier at length about it, and go on. Why don't you re-engage us, Matt, with what you were talking about earlier, where Mark of the Web and how
Sure.
Mark of the Web is a big deal.
So I'm Matt, and it's Groundhog's Day again. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So Mark of the Web is like Ryan was saying. It's kind of like one of those last ditch things, and we kind of talked about how as a control, it was an identifier. It was kind of a weaker control, kind of like UAC, and we were talking also about categorization of websites and domains and things like that. Things that weren't intended to be strong controls, but they did add layers to the onion that made it a little bit unpleasant to bite into, if you will. So as Ryan was saying, like Mark of the Web was that last thing that if you double clicked on one of these Word documents or whatever it was packaged with,
or a zip document or something like that, right?
Yeah. And so when you open up the document, there would at least be that Mark of the Web identifying it, saying like, hey, this is like an untrusted zone, right? So Mark of the Web I think we talked about this earlier and I was remembering, the Mark of the Web originated as like a web protection thing for Internet Explorer. And it essentially just said like, hey, this file came from the web and therefore, trusted, untrusted or whatever. It then was implemented into like the data stream for the actual file itself with just like a little bit, right? Like what Ryan was saying, that just kind of said, hey, this is a sketchy file. So if you open it or you try to execute it or do whatever, you're going to have some sort of safeguard, safe screen that pops up and just says, hey, just so you remember, this is a Count Dracula from the internet, which should totally be on a t-shirt or something like that.
Right.
But with the if I remember correctly, with the research itself that went into it, like what Ryan was saying with like the zip bypassing that and how simple it was, they originated off of ISOs, right? So some people researching it from what I saw, they were like, man, this is crazy that this works. Let's just try recreating it in the most basic level. Oh, wow, that worked with a zip. And so, whatever implementation that you kind of want to use of this bypass of Mark of the Web, it creates issues because that's usually a one last step protection. Because if you remember correctly with Felina, you double click on that Word doc, it's automagic. There's no doc M, there's no remote template injection or anything like that. It's the actual document itself. Within the document, the XML is making that query on behalf of the user to the Microsoft Diagnostic tool, which would then execute the payload that was, I think, an overloaded PowerShell script, right? That's been formatted correctly for XML. So your single quotes, your double quotes, your ands, your brackets, things like that would be encoded particularly. But all that to say, it makes it that much worse because now you get, this file, you open it, there's nothing. You just fire it and it blows up in your face. So the joke we were making earlier is it's like a brown paper bag over a hand grenade. Like you've essentially just opened it up and you're like, oh, this is a horrible thing. And it doesn't really have any protection, but like there's at least something there. And now there's
Right.
just,
Yeah, they just simply removed that last signpost on the road for
yeah,
you to have any warning that something was going to happen, and they took away your last hint that you could be you could be doing something that you don't want to be doing, um, and they were even still able they were even so some of the files were able to be executed without this warning, which is the other interesting part about it. So what it meant was, in the long run, someone could have been exploiting this or these files since before Falina was discovered. Most likely,
yeah.
that's the case. And I think the first researcher um, who discovered Mark of the Web stuff was, I think, Will Dorman, and just was only. I mean, he wasn't even able to get this thing. What this was back in, I don't know, February or March, I think.
Oh, wow.
No, maybe March or April. I can't remember when it was. But like this wasn't something that a lot of people saw. It's only after they released the patch on Patch
Mhm.
Tuesday where people started going, well, when did we see anything about this? How did anybody have any early warning? And he was
Yeah.
one of the people that was able to show us that Windows is skipping the warning dialogues, the smart screens before executing files, JS files, and things like that, which makes this thing pretty interesting. Now, Dave was saying that you could probably find this during fuzz testing, but I don't know, Matt. When was the last time you did any of that before you opened things up, and before, like if you were looking at what's good, you know? So that's what makes this sort of thing ingenious, right?
Yeah,
You know,
it's definitely a very unique and interesting flaw. It strikes, I mean, if I was just a betting man, it strikes more of a, like what Dave was saying, like you could find it with fuzzing, identifying, the internal workings. I know Microsoft was on schedule or has released the debugging symbols for Word and things like that, right? But that
right,
wouldn't really help you here because obviously there's like other attributes in play and the greater ecosystem of Windows and like how Windows handles particular files and ADSs within those files. It strikes me more of like a just an overlooked error, right? Something that
right.
like Serious Sam. Remember Serious Sam where like they patched I forget what patch was the introduction for, but once they patched it, it basically made it so that anybody could read the Sam Hive, which was like the passwords and stuff. And it's like, okay, like those types of things. And it's easy as a side comment too, which I'm sure we're all probably thinking the same thing, like how could like a big company like that make that type of mistake? But when you have millions and millions of lines of code. I mean, when you look at the amount of code that's been introduced exponentially, like if you have like take for example a simple C like echo hello world, right?
Right.
Application. It's like what you pull in your library, you have your declarations or whatever, and then you have like your basic method or function or whatever you're calling it. It's just like one instance. There's much less room for error there, but as you add complexity, like looking at like for example SQL injections, right? You got a website, now you've hooked a database, and now you've got this other stuff. So then people are like, okay, prepared statements, and let's use hashing, let's use these things. And whenever there's that implementation of complicated code functionality or interdependency, there's always a spot in those flexible joints that's going to be interesting to look at from the attacker perspective.
Yeah. And Dave had a video that he cut to show how the flag was disabled.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait for we're going to have to push that out to everybody so that you can see from the attacker's perspective just what he had to do or she had to do to go in and simply toggle this off. And I make this sound like it's easy, but at the end of the day, it requires an intricate knowledge of what you have to bypass. So the researcher or the bad guy still has to have a pretty good knowledge of what's available to them to go and bypass.
Yeah.
And giving it a shot is what it came down to. Somebody probably said, "All right, well, let me disable. Let me make it so that if you extract files from this zip, that the mark of the web won't toggle on, and we'll just see if it works." And that's the genius and the simplicity and what made us want to talk about it here with you guys today is, like so many other things, this one didn't require a whole heap of technical knowledge and skill. It didn't
Yeah.
require lines of purpose-built, bespoke. This wasn't O-Day like you think of O-Day. This was O-Day like, oh shoot, I just made myself a little O-Day action. And
Yeah.
so who knows for how long it was exploited, but you got to figure months. So um, yeah, that was the first thing we wanted to discuss with you guys today, because it was just, to us, it was really cool that somebody had figured out this. It's almost a backdoor to a not very backdoor. It's being displayed to you. You're actively engaging with it. You're asking to look at the file,
Yeah.
and the backdoor, the last safety measure was simply taken from you. It's kind of brilliant, kind of
Yeah.
scary.
And one thing I'll throw out there too is it strikes me as like a similar weird situation with the zip archives and executing or unarchiving files outside of the archive directory, right?
Right.
It's called colloquially zip slip,
Okay.
but using dot slashes and things like that in the name of the files that you're then loading into it. So then when it executes, it says, where do I put these files? 2 directories up. That sounds good. And then you have that functionality where it's then running, executing, and then dropping these archived files where they're not even supposed to be. And now you have like this wholly different situation where you can set persistence and things like that. It strikes me very similar to that. And I'm sure there will be more to kind of what you alluded to, Mr. English, is that there will probably be more interesting things that come out from security researchers, fuzzing things, fiddling with them, because I mean, what's the saying I always heard in like the red team side is like, once is a coincidence, twice is an occurrence, 3 times is a blue teamer adversary / IR action.
Yeah.
So it just makes me wonder, right, if there's going to be any more interesting stuff that comes out of it, because we're 2 for 2 now, and both of these things, to your point, have been extremely fruitful for adversaries and red teamers.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I ever saw unzipped a file, the first time I ever unzipped a file, I thought to myself, and this is why I really didn't know anything about security or anything like that, but the first time I unzipped a file, I thought, this is a great place to hide stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you compressed a bunch of, what is this thing? Oh, you compressed a bunch of stuff in a zip file, and I open it, and then like, what comes out? It just, the fact that there's a zip file makes me think of a Jack in the Box, but in all the bad ways. Like the clown comes out, he's on a spring, he's got a knife in one hand, he's got like a club in the other, and you just get one, and he's swinging around. But every time I ever, like for years, I'd look at these zip files, and be like, why'd you send that? Oh, I had to. It's real big. I had to compress it. So yes, it just goes to show that even now, sneaky things are hidden in places like that, and it's you obfuscate as many layers as you can your payload. And I like what you mentioned about starting your files off with dot slash. I mean, if you I guess where do you open these files then? Like in a sub
sandbox all day long, right?
The pre-sandbox, post-sandbox.
Well, one thing too about what you were saying earlier that I just wanted to throw out there is it feels like a weird throwback to like when I was younger. And I'm sure they still probably exist, but like websites that have wares websites that have like cracked software and stuff like that. We used to not me, of course, because I've always been a good law-abiding citizen, but other nefarious individuals on the internet Draculas, as you've described them, they would take like ROMs of like Super Nintendo games, right?
Right.
And using the GIF or GIF, depending on your flavor.
It's a GIF. We all know that it's a GIF.
Yes.
So, go on.
They would shove the file, the zip file archive that contained the SNES ROM or the actual SNES ROM itself into the GIF file, and then share it on, I think it was like, one of them was like Image Frog, and then like this was before like Giphy and stuff like that. But whatever the website that hosted the GIF files would have these pictures, and the picture would literally be the cover for the game. And because there was no space limitation on the image itself, you could just browse to this person's catalog. You'd be like, I want this game. And it was like a virtual, back in the day, Blockbuster Video. You could just pull it down, and then drop it into your WinZip or whatever before they were asking for $1,000 every time you logged in,
Right.
and you could pull the SNES game out and then play it. And I did see I saw it on the internet a few years later where they were using that with Anonymous and 4chan with low orbit ion cannon, and they were using GIF images, and the GIF image itself contained instructions on how to attack the asset as part of the operation. So this is part of the reason why they were able to get so many people using Loic, was because they would go on and they'd be like, hey, join our raid party. And then everybody would be like, yay, I'm a hacker. And then they would send out these images. And I'm
Yeah.
sure probably backdoors and rats and Trojans and all sorts of fun acronyms that were packed into that thing for all the noobs to pull down. But they'd pull down the image, they'd look at the image, and the image would say, step one, unzip this image. And so they would do that and they would get this file. And then step two, run this command and type in this. And that would be like, targeting, dhs.gov or something like that. And
Right.
they'd fire it like, haha, we're hackers. So like, the relevance to your point about mark of the web, the relevance to the outside of the archive execution and the steganography or the obfuscation associated with it, and then tricks using zip and things like that, as we kind of pondered it, has been very interesting, because what's old is new again, right? And
Sure.
some of these tactics, techniques, and procedures still remain the same, but we have these variations that, when weaponized correctly with things like Felina, it brings new life, kind of like resurrecting a dead body like a vampire.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
brings it back to the fold and becomes a viable attack again. So sorry, it's side. My brain was like, oh man, remember when you were a kid on the internet and you were downloading things that well, I didn't, but
For free. But I mean, so and this, but all becomes new. I mean, one major source of malware delivery is pirated software. People who want to get
Yes.
software for on the cheap that they may actually really need,
Yep.
and you're getting something from you're buying from a thief.
Yep.
Buying a stolen car, man. It's buyer beware. There's no reason to trust that person because they obtained it in an untrustworthy fashion, and yet people continue to download pirated software. People,
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't know why people do that, but this is still a very common vector, and it's it's never going to go away. People are always going to look for those shortcuts. You remember when all those WordPress sites were compromised?
Yeah.
People were getting free, or people were going out and looking for free WordPress backgrounds for their websites that they wanted to build. And now you might have to pay $45 or $50 to get the kind of background you wanted for your dentist's office. Let's say you want it to look a certain kind of way, or you could go and pick up one of these free ones that are equally good looking. And
Yeah.
sure, that's great. But now everything that goes through that WordPress site also belongs to another person. You don't know who that is.
Yeah.
So all your traffic, and it was just from I want some. I just don't feel like paying anything for this today. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's you can only yeah, we all like to get over,
But
but
to your point,
when it comes to
yeah.
this stuff, you have to pay your way because those traps are laid for you in all the free pirated stuff that's out there. So
Yeah.
try to avoid those things. Obviously,
To
students
the
have it
best of your
hard.
ability. Yeah.
Yeah, to the best of your ability. But like students have it hard because they're looking for software they don't have to pay for. They're looking for
Yeah.
books that they don't have to pay for. I don't. I'm glad I'm not going to college right now. But if you imagine like buying the fourth edition book and looking at the third edition, there's no difference. And you take the class, it tells you I got to have the fourth edition, or I can go online and maybe find a pirated version. What are you going to do? Bring
Yeah.
in
I
our own
mean,
book or pirated version.
you're exactly right, and like that's the trick that some of the publishers will do, is they'll change the order of like some of the chapters, so that when
Right.
they're following along with the lecture, it's like turn to page 53, and you're like, "Meh?" But it's the exact same material, to your point. And the other thing I was going to say too is it's that is coming to roost with the security community as well. There was that Cobalt Strike leak a couple of
Right.
years ago, or maybe not a couple of years ago. Maybe I'm just old and I don't remember. Maybe it was just a couple of months ago. Time
Before
paradox.
lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, before pre-lockdown, and
Yeah.
everybody was pulling it down, and there was like those extra modules that were getting people's attention. And there was another release, and someone I had pretty good correspondence with had informed me that essentially they had found a assembly level backdoor in the precompiled crypto modules that were out there. So people were thinking, hey, I don't want to download the first contact version that's free because that's obviously sketchy. But this other one doesn't have those two modules. And when I ran Virus Scanner or whatever, like it looked pretty good.
Right.
Cool. I'll just download it and run it. And so it's like they were all backdoored, and it's just it's wild. To your point, like if it's something that you would depend your life on, like great case in point, would you buy a bunch of secondhand rock climbing ropes that look really dirty, or would you get like a brand new rock climbing rope if you're going to be dangling up in the air thousands of feet? Because one little pebble can shred that thing from the inside out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's a great analogy. Nobody should buy used rock climbing gear, especially
yeah,
not anchors.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, please, just
No,
as a rule of
don't
thumb.
buy the new one. Uh, we wanted to kind of share that with people, like, the simplicity in the simplicity was the genius in
Mhm.
that particular exploit, and that just to also remind people that the workaround for something may be there in front of you if you just continue to find more aspects of what it is that you're looking at, and sooner or later you may or may not find that one little, it's an unintentional backdoor, but simply turning off Mark of the Web was somebody's move. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
um, and I believe earlier we mentioned that this is just, or in one of our previous versions of today, we mentioned that you know that when somebody just doesn't give up, that good red teamers tend to regard no as a maybe when it comes to this, and that the only time no really does mean no is when you get a knock on your door and there's a badge, somebody holding up at your peephole, like, we need to talk to you. Like, oh, no meant
Oh,
no. A good hacker doesn't quit, and
yeah.
usually
Well,
finds some, keep turning stuff over.
what's
Um,
the saying? Winners find a way.
yeah, red teamers find a way.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly your point. You guys, I mean, because there are so many controls, but you got to remember one of the best things. Just this is the last bit I'll say about it, because I know
Yeah,
that you have something you want to jump to, but um, when you think about security, everything that is implemented security wise, locks, ground penetrating sonar, radar, shaker wire, uh, window vibration technology, like those things have all been created by people,
right,
and people are flawed. Now, granted, when you have 500 MIT level scientists developing technology, the odds are probably in their favor. But there is a way. There's always a way, and there will always be a way. And like as we go through these things, sometimes the simplest things, and this is something I've seen in my career, is like the simplest things work, right? Hey, we've got a WAF, and this WAF is really good. And then, say I found a cross-site scripting, and they're like, okay,
right.
cool. We wrote a detection rule for it. And I'm like, cool. All right. So instead of saying on mouse over, I'm going to do on mouse click. And like, damn it all. And like, we go right back to the board because, like your specialization as the attacker mindset or the defender mindset, et cetera, is a very unique slice of the pie. And your view might be, it's not always a panopticon. We're not all
Right.
looking at the same spot, in the same way. It's a panopticon where you might be looking off in this direction. You're like, there's a ceiling right there with glass windows. If I just chuck a rock and everyone else is looking straight at the center, I'm like, no, dude, there's no way we can get out. So, things are always made by people. You can find a way if you think about it creatively. And sometimes, what's the engineering principle? KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
Yeah. So that's all I was going to say. I just want to throw that out there.
No, I mean, it's true in the physical world, and it's true digitally, right? Like, people stand a watch in a watchtower. That guy's going to make a mistake sooner or later. He'll
Yeah.
turn away. You know, um,
Those fees.
yeah, exactly, or he'll get tired. Speaking of watchtowers, so at Cyber WarCon last week, it this is, imagine if they had RSA, but it was not corporate. Imagine if RSA was happening and it was simply all the people in the business who actually have their hands on the keyboards, or they're like only one step removed from the guys with the hands on their keyboards. So
Very
you
technical.
yeah, it was like, is if you could rename Cyber WarCon, it would be like the FUBU of of conferences for us by us.
Yeah.
And I mean, I looked around the room and I saw people that, you only see them on Twitter or in certain Slack channels where information is shared,
Yeah. That's
and
awesome.
yeah, it's like, it's really cool to meet people that you only read about that are actually putting out information that is helpful. So the conference was one where you can share what you learned, but you cannot say who it was that gave you the information. So the
Interesting.
information itself isn't protected, but you're not supposed to talk about the source.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's there's a old British convention called Chatham House Rules, I
Yeah, I
think
was
is
gonna say Chatham House rules, baby.
exactly. Yeah. So in that, and I was, it's funny because, not the smartest guy in the room when I go to places like that, especially, and I'm just furiously writing notes all day long in my notebook, and I look around, everybody's just thoughtfully engaged. I'm like, oh, scribbling. So, but a lot of the stuff that was passed along was very, very interesting, and deeply concerning.
Mm.
Um, so one of the many things they talked about, and I'll try to go through them, is, we're looking at two two different two different paradigms that are going to affect the future of cybersecurity. Um, the first of which was the amount of spying that Chinese organizations do internally and
Hmm.
internationally on internally to monitor dissidents within the borders of China, and externally to monitor expatriates who live abroad who may be communicating with internal dissidents. So
Hmm.
the spying network is global, and what they're doing is they're using a lot of apps that you want to download for social media purposes to do that. And they're targeting these communities also by infiltrating social media groups with
Hmm.
really well done sock puppets where they encourage people to, hey, I was using this, and let me share this with you, and actually getting the software on people's phones that way. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and they, in parallel to that, and this was also brought up a little bit at Aspen, was some of the lessons learned with Ukraine. So what you're seeing is Chinese surveillance is practicing on itself how to get into people's mobile networks, how to get in their phones, how to get into their lives, and how to compromise whatever security individuals have for themselves. And if you've done that, then you can probably get into organizations. But they're sharpening their tools on themselves
Yeah.
to continue to monitor what goes on in their own country, so that the expectation is that there is no place that's unsurveilled, right? Well,
Yeah.
while they're doing that, they're perfecting technique. And meanwhile, the Russians are busy dealing with every other not totally occupied person on earth with a skill set is probably contributing or wants to contribute to the defense of Ukraine. So
Yeah.
at the moment, Russian, uh, you're talking about the agencies that normally conduct cyber warfare for them, or CNO, and their little pawn groups that normally do a lot of that. They're somewhat tied down. Some of their bandwidth is being taken up by the war in Ukraine, and these people are busy fighting off everything that's coming their way. And good, because I hope they implode, but they probably
Yeah.
won't. And what that means is, what the prediction here is, that as or hopefully soon, Ukraine begins to sort of taper down. The expectation is that ransomware groups that are controlled by Russian, puppet masters will begin looking for more money, because how's Russia going to pay for all the damage they've caused, not just to Ukraine, and I'm sure if somebody hands them a bill next year or the year after, they're just going to walk out on that bill, but the
Yeah.
damage that they're suffering to their own military. Like, where are they going to get the money to rebuild?
Yeah.
So one of the discussions was, hey, just like North Korea gets a significant amount of its GDP comes from stealing,
Yeah.
information and especially through crypto around the world, you're going to see that as this thing dies down, you're going to see an increase in these kinds of attacks, ransom attacks, just financial theft, and anything that you can imagine along those lines is one of the things they're predicting. While the bear is tied down, the bear is busy trying to fight for its life. Sooner or later, that guy's going to come out of this one way or the other and just be even more hungry.
Yeah.
And they're talking about practice makes perfect. With the Chinese, what they discussed was they're making fewer OPSEC mistakes that make it possible for threat intel people and threat hunters to find the breadcrumbs that'll allow you to track something back to them. So they're
Yeah.
perfecting that. They're making fewer mistakes. There's less OSINT being conducted in places like that. So open source intelligence is starting to become a little harder to come by, which, by the way, if you've ever studied anything in the OSINT field, you'll know how important Twitter is
Mm-hmm.
to conducting OSINT. Like if you look at Bellingcat or you look at OSINT Technical on Twitter, they use a lot of Twitter to do things. They used to use it a lot for geolocation, but people who post things, people who post photos, there's something else in the picture I can use to kind of find out where that was. It's not timestamp. Like you may
Yeah.
clean that, but I can find that. So if Twitter was to go away, what is that? What are the implications for InfoSec Twitter, the way we share information among other people in the industry? What are the
Mm-hmm.
implications for people doing open source intelligence? This is not just about one dude making a huge mistake because of his ego and
Yeah.
potentially ruining a
I'm
company.
just thinking that.
This is also about somebody could potentially either diminish or temporarily shut down one of the world's major communications avenues.
Yeah.
That's not good for anybody. So, to give you an idea, like if you're conducting operations in the field and let's say you're my higher headquarters, Matt, and I'm the intel, I'm the recon element out in the field, and I'm looking over what's going on in the area of operations, and I need to radio up to you constantly and tell you what I'm seeing. I'm your eyes and ears, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So imagine usually every night or thereabouts on a very regular and prescribed basis, we might roll over our frequencies to another frequency on our
Mm-hmm.
radios. You do that for a number of reasons, mainly for operational security, right?
Yeah.
So at any given time, I might go, oh, all right, it's midnight. We're going to roll freaks, roll the frequency, look it up in my little handbook, or I've got it memorized. And I'm like, okay, we roll our frequency over to a new frequency. I get up on the radio and I reach out to you, and you're there waiting for me. All right. Twitter. Imagine if Twitter just shut down tomorrow, all the information that we share with other researchers come on. I don't use Twitter to talk about like my dinner, but I'm
Yeah.
using Twitter to see what other security researchers are putting out. And there's some great
Yep.
ones. If you were doing threat intel for a living and you didn't wake up and read Twitter for about half an hour every day and then have alerts to certain individuals that you follow who reliably post, oh, I've got this. This is a C2 I just found. This is a bad website I just found. Here's another bad guy. And they just dump this stuff out there for us to, out of their own altruism. And if that
Yeah.
just disappeared one day without us all moving en masse over to Mastodon, InfoSec, or you know what I mean? If we all
Yeah.
didn't pick a place to go and get there at the same time, then we all suffer a communications gap.
Dude, there's so much there too, to your point. Like when you think about that, typically if everyone is congregated to an area, a huddle,
Right,
and we have that information being shared real time, to your point,
right.
and there is diaspora from that, people are not going to all go back to the same huddle, to your point, like Mastodon, because I might not like Mastodon because I have a phobia of giant woolly mammoths or whatever the reason is, right?
Or you don't like the way that's set up because it's weirdly complicated for no good reason.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. Like there is a certain ease of access that leads to that huddle. But the thing that I was also going to say is, you bring up so many good points about the situation with Twitter, OSINT, and information, right? Because take, for example, the internet pre mass communication using something like Twitter for information security. Oops, I just hit my camera.
Get crazy.
When when we look up information on vulnerabilities, right? Like Felina is a great example.
Right,
That was initially leaked on Twitter. If Twitter is
right.
not there, and as a result of Twitter being such a broad pipe per se for information to be transferred over,
Right.
with that leaving, all of the previous stuff, like I don't know if anybody out there is like a pen tester or whatever, but exploit DB is pretty sparse compared to Twitter and getting good information. I don't even go to exploit DB pretty much at all anymore.
Right.
So that was maintained up until things like Twitter became the mainstay. When Twitter's lights shut off, there's going to be a burp before something else is picked up. And that means that all of those vulnerabilities that people are discovering that aren't being shared are going to be that much more dangerous because there's
Oh
not
yeah.
that rapid dissemination of word of mouth. And that,
Yep.
to your point, is going to be huge on top of the information in regards to like OSINT. Like the OSINT side is insane to me because it has allowed for a mass quick acceleration of information in skill sets, right? Because if there's good training on OSINT or OSINT challenges, like, hey, I took a picture of this dog, where was this located? You know, you see those challenges all the time, and it has made extremely capable cyber operators in that sense. If that is removed, and these cyber operators are no longer fully linked or communicating or whatever, and there is this diaspora, the information is going to be diasporaing with them. And then how do you rapidly train up people? Now things are going to be towered or siloed versus broadband. And
Yeah.
we're going to have that problem. So you are 110% right that it is dark clouds. Was it dark times, Mr. Potter, or whatever?
Yeah. Something like
Harry
that.
Potter?
Yeah.
You know, like it's not going to be good because
Yeah.
as those things, coupled with what you said about threat actors, like with Russia and with China, and the one I remember what I was going to say when we're talking about the sock puppet accounts, having done sock puppet and information operations myself,
Right.
targeting employees and things like that, it is already easy. And just because people are by nature, we are developed as a species of animals that we want to trust each other because that is how
Right.
we have succeeded, right? Brains, co-working, and sweat are pretty much the reason that, in my opinion, from what I've read, we're good. But that's a different conversation. What I'm trying to get at is that when we have these accounts and things like that set up, there's rapid communications, right? On top of that, what's happening when someone does a post-mortem on the identification of these Chinese threat actors? They write it up. They
Yep.
posted their blog. They share it on
Put in their
Twitter.
blog. Right.
So if I'm going to be doing, counteraction against the IR side as a red teamer, I want to know what the blue teamers are going to do. I want to know what, Dodd, DHS, whoever who's trying to stop these people from doing these things. I'm going to read exactly the reports that they read, and then I'm just going to improve my tradecraft because it's free training.
That's right. That's right. Now, yeah, exactly. And now you've got that coupled with we lose our vision for a little while. Our eyes and ears are
Yes.
disrupted. I mean, frankly, when you're trying, yeah, right. But when you're trying to do something on a battlefield, one of the things you want to do is disrupt the opponent's ability to hear and see what you're about. And frankly, we're about to have this done to us as a community, and the only people who are going to benefit from that are threat actors. And
Yes.
as much as I want to see a guy like Musk, who, the funny thing, the longer this thing goes on, the more people are like, oh, here's where in a lawsuit he had to admit that he doesn't have a physics degree, that he
Yeah.
lied about that. Here's how he actually got the original guys out of Tesla. Here's how he jumped into SpaceX at exactly the moment where, like, he was able to minimize the previous ownership and have enough money to sustain them to get some government contract. Like, the more this goes on, the more people are jumping on this guy's case and digging up stuff from his past. Where you look at Elon Musk, and all I see is Thomas Edison. He sells himself as like,
Yep.
oh, I'm the inventor. I'm the Nikola Tesla. I'm the guy who makes
Yeah.
stuff come out of nowhere. No, you're not, dude. You're
not Tesla.
Thomas Edison, bro. And as we look back at Thomas Edison, you're just a well-heeled thief.
Yeah,
That's
dude.
who you are,
You're
is a
right.
bully with money. And when
Yep.
you see a guy tweeting, as a, ironically enough, about like things he really clearly doesn't know much about engineering wise, and you're like, okay, so you're still doing it. You're still selling the idea that you're the man in charge. But I as much as I want to see that guy lose $44 billion somehow, I also look at it like, man, I don't need that platform to go away. If we were going to all
Yes.
leave Twitter tomorrow, cool, let's decide what that's going to be. We all got to go, because I'm telling you, man, like the people that I follow, there's probably 200 people in this community that I get whatever they post. And I'm, when you throw out all the like socializing parts of it, which is people being bored, Twitter is something I gotta keep my eye on it all day to
Yes.
really be thinking about what's going on in the world from a threat intel perspective. I got to watch Twitter all day long because something
Yeah.
might come out, and then some other researcher's like, I'm not worried about that. I got this covered. It's all good. Come to my blog. Or some other researcher's like, and just like we were talking about with Dorman, when Will Dorman released the information that he had, it was through Twitter, and it just didn't propagate very far, but it propagated to where, like, as soon as you look back, you're like, oh, that's an interesting, oh sure, boom, there's all his research, boop, there it is, and you kind of digest it quickly and be more effective at your job. So we don't want necessarily Twitter to
Yeah.
just up and disappear. Last night when
Yeah.
everybody thought it was going to close, I'm watching it and I'm just
Dude,
looking
me
through
too.
these feeds. I'm doom scrolling. I'm like, am I going to wake
No,
up and have Twitter? Is it going to? No, not like this.
yeah,
Not
not
like
like this.
this. Not like
But
this.
you bring up a good point too about the situation. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about it. One, the Elon Musk thing is careful when you go digging because it just gets you dirty, right?
Mm, yeah.
But then also, like when we think about the destruction of this kind of like Tower of Babel per se implementation that we actually had, where we
Right.
could all speak different languages, but we could all have one grand kind of communication platform for especially information security. I
Right.
imagine I was just reading an article this morning where it was saying that like information security conferences are going to be on the decline. They predicted. I can't see that happening if Twitter goes away because it's going to be even more important to have nodes until some sort of centralized huddle is created
Right.
or has been discovered or the community bonds to because we need to know this information. It's literally a
Yeah.
national security issue.
Yeah. As cybersecurity has evolved in the last 25 years, one of the pillars, is conferences, and another
Hmm.
pillar is being able to share information among people that you trust. And there's a
Yep.
few channels that you can get invited to if the right person wants you there. And then yeah, that's cool. There's a good silo. But conferences, man, like Cyber War Conference, and so let me give you
Yep.
another example of how important it was to be at this conference. So I'm, two different on the second day, somebody echoed something from the first day, and it really lit up some bulbs in my mind, which is so, and this is something that also parallels to Aspen. So they had representatives from the intelligence agencies at Aspen, and they were talking about how they're coordinating their efforts to be able to do a better job tracking, crypto for its use in ransomware, and they're doing a really good job of being able to follow the crypto better than they were last year, the year before. They're
Yep.
making investments in that. Big governments around the world are taking this more seriously and going after perpetrators. You look at what Australia said the other day, and they're like, "Hey, the gloves are off. Whatever we can do, we're going to do it." Now, did they say
Good.
we're going to find people and come to their home? They didn't say they weren't. So who knows, right? It's like we're going to be more. Our defense will be more robust. It'll be more offensive. So
Yeah.
the world has started to play that game, and you jokingly talk about being on an FBI wanted poster earlier. Is that's the first time that a hacker really knows that no means no. But now, how many wanted posters have you seen in the last 6 or 8 months
Yeah.
with like Chinese threat actors, or they're taking down groups, even Ukrainian
Yep.
thievery based groups. All right, cyber criminals are being put on blast. Now,
Yeah.
what happens? So now governments have gone after really big ransomware as a service groups, right? So all these big RAS groups are slowly being targeted and taken down. And one of the predictions that was made on both days by two totally different researchers from, the first girl was, well, I can't say where she was from, obviously, rules are rules. But so the researchers from two totally different organizations, and they both said the same thing, is that we're seeing large RAS groups come apart. In the prediction over the next year and a half or 2 years is that you'll see less and less of these groups because they're too easily focused on and targeted by gov. Law
Yeah. Big and
enforcement,
slow.
they're more trackable than they would be otherwise. So you'll see them splinter, and smaller groups will be made, and individuals who have had a few practice runs or a couple reps at conducting ransomware maybe have a little money in their pocket. Now they can go off the shelf and buy tools. If you know an initial access broker through all of your evil dealings, now you can go purchase the rest of the tool set that you need. Now there's two things here. The dangerous part was they're seeing an increase. One of their, hey, we can prove this because they're seeing an increase of groups charging people money and not having the key to unlock what they've locked. So people are paying, right? And because
Wow.
because these groups are like kind of like fly by night, and
Yeah.
the thing about big ransomware as a service groups turns out that they enforce the recovery on their people, whoever is a user of ransomware as a service. Turns out that if you burn your clients, they'll
Yeah,
cut
they're
you
not going to
off.
pay.
Right.
Yeah.
If you don't let your clients pay you and get their data back, then you've disrupted the business model. So the RAS groups will blackmail you, which is
Yeah.
crazy. But
Yeah.
is there honor among thieves? No. There's money among business people though. So they're
Yeah.
playing it like it's a business.
That's a good
Now these
response to
groups,
that.
right? And
Yeah.
so these groups don't care because there's nobody looking over their shoulder to tell them they can't keep playing the game, and
Mhm.
they can as tools. So if you get burned because they didn't have the key to give you after you paid, then they just move on to the next guy because that's the end of that. That's the end of the story. There's no recourse, right? You
Yeah.
can't appeal. So you never could appeal. But the point is that these groups will start to fragment, and there'll be smaller groups with with the same types of abilities, maybe not quite as good. But as they're talking about this, all I could think of was in the middle of in the middle of the war on terror. We went from like when early on, I remember there were the larger groups like the Mahdi militia, for
Mhm.
instance. We could that our intel guys and that our direct action guys could load up on and break them slowly down over the course of weeks and months.
Yeah.
So they would take them off the playing field by just persistently going after guys. And one of my buddies, they did 100 missions in 90 days because it was like, get a phone off some dude tonight. 30 minutes later, that somebody has got that phone cracked, and we're going down the list of people he's been texting, looking for keywords, and just rolling over
Rolling.
him,
Yeah.
right? So
Crazy.
but the larger terror groups were dismantled pretty effectively by, let's say, 2007, maybe the end of 2007 and 8. But then what you had was all these groups turned into splinter cells.
Yep.
Cells are really hard to track. You might catch one cell, but that doesn't lead you to the rest of the organization. So by
Yeah.
becoming cellular, they were very difficult to break down and take off the board. And that's all I'm sitting here hearing this. I'm like, oh my God, dude, that was the problem that they had beginning in 2007 and 8, and then all the way through, especially Iraq, but really eventually in Afghanistan, up until the dawn of ISIS in 2012 and
Yeah.
13, where it
It,
congealed again into one giant. So you broke apart the major groups and they splintered off, and then when the time was right, they came back together for protection because it
yeah.
took us a long time to figure out how to go after individual cells. As a community, if we see this happening next year, where larger cells or larger ransomware groups are broken down into small cells of independent operators, that is harder to track.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in the InfoSec community has to change gears, and the one way that you track that better is by sharing information with your peer
Yeah.
group. Now, if we lose Twitter, which is one of our major comms, it's going to be even that much harder to track groups. It's going to be that much harder to share things with people, and a lot of guys are going to be working after the fact. Like
Yeah.
instead of now getting ahead of the stuff and being preventive, and letting law enforcement clean up messes and go after bad guys. Now I think a lot of us are going to see that DFIR is going to become, it's going to grow because we're going
Yeah.
to see a lot of stuff. And it really bothered me because I don't like to see those parallels in this field after having gone through all that. But this is something else, we're seeing the increased use of attacks against IoT in Soho.
Hmm.
So you and I have discussed this on the show before. And now we're seeing other researchers come up with that research that we talked about
Yep.
in July. We're seeing, they actually had a really good breakdown of the major ransomware, the major malware groups that were used. And if you had to bet, where was it? Um, what group, what ransomware using software is the most popular? It looks like Lockbit has become the heavyweight champ.
I was gonna say, was it Lockbit, Conti, and then what was the
Yeah.
other one? We had, it was one of them Reaper, not Reaper, Thanos.
Uh,
Thanos was like as a service that was real popular for a while. But yeah,
yeah,
Lockbit.
yeah. So it's like this is a really good conference because in that conference they're like, hey, here's all the statistics you need to be successful. I mean, some of the conferences that you go to, they're not broadcasting this stuff.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
dude,
this
there's a
wasn't
lot
a
of
live streaming event.
yeah, there's a
And the
lot of
reason
those
for
now.
that, that's right. And it's because those were conferences where they want you to be networking as much as you're learning. Because while you're there, you look around and it's like, oh, that girl's important. That dude's important. That guy, I've heard of him. I've heard of her. And you keep everywhere you look, there was more graybeards there than I've ever seen in one room. Like
Yeah.
everybody had like this. I was like, all right, I fit in. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't, there wasn't anybody in, Patabronia, you know, jackets.
Yeah, that's
There
a good
was,
indicator too.
yeah,
Like
this had
one
no,
thing I was
yeah,
going to throw out there too about what you were talking about with the cells and the cellular work is
yep,
everything for me. All roads lead to Rome per se. All rivers lead to the ocean. And that for me has been red teaming, and it's very interesting because reading about as a civilian outside the perspective of like intelligence gathering and like the collectors and like the people who are the handlers for the collectors and like chain of command and stuff like that.
right,
How that so similarly mimics a good red team that has implemented strong architecture into their own infrastructure. Because I forget where I was talking about this earlier, but essentially, if you do it right, the question was, hey, if Cobalt Strike now offers the capability to do round robin for listeners, right?
right,
You have one beacon, and if it can't get to one agent, it says, let me try the next one on the list, or it'll rotate. And I was like, that's actually not, in my opinion, the best OPSEC choice. And they were like, well, why? And I was like, the reason is because if I'm a malware analyst, what am I going to do? I'm going to put that in a box and I'm just going to see what it does. And if it's just chunking through every 30 minutes, a different connection, I'm like, that's a bad connection. That's a bad connection. That's a bad connection. You're going to burn your whole infrastructure where you want it cellular to your point, right? You have a
mhm,
redirector on a domain or a content delivery network, or you're fronting. However, and that one redirector has one asset or piece of malware attached to it. And once that's burned, you can then say, okay, that redirector is dead, but your infrastructure is safe. It takes a lot of work when it's atomized in that capacity or cellular, to your point, to go in and eat all of those things because they can always regenerate. Because the handler, right, the
right,
team server or the infrastructure resides in a protected VPC or whatever space, right? And there's like a lot of stuff that goes down the line with the technical side. And in the future, we'll probably have some good content where we talk about those things. But at the end of the day, it mimics that. And to your point, it's really scary to think about that because considering the importance of cyber, and I say cyber hesitantly because you and I when we were younger, like we probably heard it called as information security, but now it's cyber. I think of like dudes with like crazy Ray Bans and like pink mohawks and laser guns, but you know when we go into those things and we think about the future of how like cyber operations and cyber warfare will be conducted,
yep,
and these things start to splinter, we start to see that. And you and I know from different sides of the coin how damn hard it is to pin down the team server, the
yeah,
handler, the asset collection chain of command, the like the individual operators working within a group. I mean, we had it down to a pretty good art. We knew, hey, PLA worked from 9 to 5 China time,
right.
and they worked out of this one location, and we know they use these certain proxies and things like. And then that's blown up, and then we don't have Twitter. Ooh, that's some
Yeah,
scary stuff.
one of the researchers specifically went into timestamps. Like they were able to do attribution on a PLA group because they were able to peg the hours. They had a
Yeah.
beautiful chart of all the activity, and they could tell, like, all right, this group takes a break for lunch for at least 90 minutes. That's how well they had these guys drilled down.
That's
And yeah,
awesome.
and then they were actually able to talk about how, like, oh, here's where the night shift comes on. And they're kind of the B team because if you look at their activity profile, it's like they're just not quite as busy. So there's
Yeah.
either fewer of them or they're just not as good. But the day shift, the main productivity came in that period after lunch and before quitting time, where this particular PLA group was very like they must have all had a great lunch because
Yeah.
like that was their power up because they're so busy. And then but by the same token, they're like, all right, well, those are the hours of greatest danger to us,
Yeah.
as defenders. So, yeah, if we lose a piece of communications gear that was inherent to all,
Yeah.
then we will lose some of our vision into the battlefield here. Speaking of the battlefield, one of the coolest things at the Aspen conference was the dude from Craigslist, Craig Newmark, was talking about how to bring new blood into cybersecurity, into
Hmm.
information security, and the places that he's going to look for it,
Hmm.
and the places where they're finding a lot of great results. And the story that he mentioned was we used to go into colleges and universities, and if we didn't like directly approach their computer science groups, we would go to like the math department and say, look, uh, give me the five best students that you got. I want to talk to them and try to convince them to come into cybersecurity. And now he's talking about like, man, we're getting great people to come in this industry from the veteran community. We're getting, girls who code. He said
Hmm.
the cool thing though, he said, he said, who's been instrumental? The Girl Scouts.
Really interesting.
Yes. Yes. He said, we've had great results working with this. I can't remember what state that it was that he mentioned, but he said, yeah, he's like the Girl Scouts. They're doing a great job of like they're like you know shaping the opinions of these young girls that hey you're already in the Girl Scouts. You're probably a certain type of a kid.
Yeah.
You know, you're a little oh he'll never do anything wrong. He's a Boy Scout. I don't know why that's would be any different for Girl Scouts, but like yeah, you're finding people who are already kind of wanting to be a net positive, let's say, in their life, or maybe their parents.
Community. Yeah.
I don't know, but he said, yeah, like the Girl Scouts is a pretty good recruiting avenue for us for the net. But that's the
Huh.
problem is it's the next generation. They're going to be here in 5 or 8 or 10 years. We need people to come into this soon, like now
Yeah.
ish, and like all the agencies, everybody, all the representatives, they all touched on like this is important. Like we need to go outside the box. We need to be thinking about, hey, psychology PhDs in psychology are being recruited to make social media apps more sticky and more addictive. Well, we need PhDs in psychology to come into cybersecurity to help us understand why phishing attacks are so successful. Like
Yeah.
help us protect against that. Go get me a head shrinker. Tell them how to
Mhm.
write. And you know these are besides, hey, yeah, we all need data analysts, but like, did you ever think that we needed to do like a push on recruiting for psychology degrees? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense now. And
Hmm.
between that, yeah, and obviously, um, the next generation of cybersecurity practitioners is a big deal. But another thing that reminds me of being back overseas is there was a period of time when recruiting was pretty low and the Green Beret community was looking for people to come into it. And I remember seeing signs all over the camp. They didn't care if you were honestly, one of the signs is if you're a butcher, baker, or candlestick maker and you want to wear a Green Beret, we'll make you one. Like
Dang.
but that's been their ethos for a long time. It's like, I don't care if you came from the infantry. I want non-traditional people to come here and inform us with a different viewpoint. Once you make it through all that it takes to be here,
Yeah.
you come built in with a different mindset that can help us find what we're looking for. And I
Yeah.
think cybersecurity needs to press that advantage. Like we don't need just computer science people. We don't need we need history majors.
Yeah.
We need psychology.
Yeah.
We need liberal arts people to come into this community because that informs the community, right? That's a different perspective. Just like we
Yeah.
talked about at the beginning, some kid who knows an ISO file just enough about it to switch off Mark of the Web, you know, that experience that made that person just toggle things on and off came from somewhere. It's
Yeah.
inventiveness and creativity.
That hacker mindset. Yeah.
That hacker mindset. You know, I hate to do this, but we're getting the wrap it up signal.
Oh yeah. Oh.
It's
The
I'm
sheep's tail.
talking. We're getting the wrap it up. Wrap it up, B. So
Get on out of here, boys.
we're gonna have to cut this one short, but yeah, I think speaking for myself, once again, man, I really enjoyed working with you here, Matt.
Yeah, same. Likewise, always good to chit chat and always interesting conversation too. You know, like we start with like our set cadence, like we're gonna talk about certain CVEs or certain things in the community, certain things of interest, and then it kind of delves into like the good philosophy overall, which I think is probably added bonus, hopefully for the viewers. You know,
Yeah.
feedback would be nice, everybody at home, if that's helpful. But I find it very helpful personally. So yeah, thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you. I hope that the next time we do this, we're able to do it a little bit cleaner and better so that we can
Yeah.
get some more feedback in real time. Well, we promise you this to the audience that's still with us. We're going to sort this out so that the next one of these you see is going to be done, you know, proper. We're going to,
Yes.
you know, I'm going to go find Torvald and choke him until he makes Linux work. Get it working on Vimeo. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving to all who are listening, who are celebrating Thanksgiving, and otherwise enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you soon.
Yep.
Thank you, Matt.
Cheers, everyone.
All right,
Thank you,
y'all.
sir.
All right, now. Bye, everybody.